The second discussion of Chapter 11 is actually going to kind of cover a lot of different things, including different methods used to cut down forests, different ones that some are better than others. We're going to talk about fires, which is a natural type of succession within forests, and wrap up with some ways we can actually do things better. So anyway, selective cutting, kind of in the name, intermediate aged mature trees are cut in small groups. So we cut down some of the young ones, we cut down some of the mature ones. Not the worst thing in the world. We kind of selectively choose what we want. That does leave some biodiversity, other plants that are in the forest yet. What they have to look at is lumber mills particularly want a high graded tree. They want the largest specimens cut. The problem with that is when we cut those really good ones, that kind of reduces genetic variability within a forest system. It also allows the forest floor to become warmer because the canopy generally shades that forest floor, and that can actually disrupt a lot of things, including the detrivores and decomposers that are on that forest floor, which is going to basically mess up our ecological cycling of nutrients. It can be drier, and of course it can to fires. Something called shelter wood cutting are trees that basically provide shelter in the forest. Those are trees that grow in full sunlight, so they're the taller trees. They're generally the ones that shelter the rest. Another type of cutting is actually seed tree cutting, where we remove trees who would begin a new generation. That's bad because we want those trees to be able to reproduce that are going to make more naturally. Clear cutting is terrible. Clear cutting is when they literally go into a forest system and actually cut everything down, and they don't necessarily take everything. Problem with that oftentimes too is it leaves a lot of underbrush, which can lead to forest fires. Clear cutting, here's a couple little advantages and disadvantages. You do get higher timber yields because you go in quickly. It's very efficient. You don't select different ones, which wastes a lot of time. Maximizes economic return in the shortest time, can reforest with genetically improve fast-growing trees, so that's a healthy alternative if they reforest it. Support or short time to reestablish new stands of trees because it's secondary succession. Need less skill in planting. Best way to harvest tree plantations is the easiest, and it can provide food for or space rather for tree species needing sunlight. So basically, we start from scratch. There's a lot of areas for growth. The disadvantages is it does reduce biodiversity. Big time. Disrupts our ecosystem process, destroys and fragments some natural habitats. It's not natural at all for this to happen. Leaves moderate to large openings, increases soil erosion because keep in mind trees or any vegetation actually when it rains they absorb water. Instead what happens is when we lose these is actually just promotes erosion or runoff. Increases sediment, water pollution, flooding when done on steep slopes. We'll talk about the Himalayas as an example of that. Eliminates most recreational value for several decades. Here's just a type of cycle that a lot of companies go through. They'll start kind of on the bottom here and clear cut an entire area. A lot of times they will plant new seedlings. Keep in mind in the United States we have a very good law that says for every tree cut down by industry they have to plant and maintain 2, which is a good thing. The problem is it takes a long time for those 2 to actually regrow. So then what happens is we go through and we let trees grow. They remove the weak ones. Not a bad idea because we promote the strong ones, get rid of the weak ones, which actually if we left it alone nature would do on its own. But look at it, it takes like 25 years to get to a mature forest in the end, which we're going to cut down. So it's not a real good plan. It doesn't necessarily renew it at all. Here's a better idea. And the reality is we need these things. We need them for our resources. We go through and do what's called strip cutting. So they strip this type of land 1 year, and then maybe in 3 to 5 years they strip this one next to it. And what happens is that allows regrowth in these other ones down the road. So it kind of progressively allows biodiversity, cuts some trees out. It's kind of a win-win. The effects of deforestation. Deforestation simply is cutting down forests. Does reduce biodiversity. Ecological services of forests can be reduced greatly too. Changes regional climate. It can actually contribute to global warming because trees can actually absorb a lot of that carbon dioxide. Plus it releases something called VOCs, which we'll talk about down the road when we talk pollutants. or I'm sorry, trees actually can contribute to VOCs, because that's another sidelight. It actually can emit carbon dioxide, which is global warming. So if you cut down trees, that's going to prematurely have the tree rot, and it's going to release that carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Original world forests are decreased by up to 50%, so we're really hammering these, and a lot of that's in the tropics. We'll talk about why the tropics is going soon. Temperate forests, of course, where we have increased from reforestation. Secondary succession works very well around us because our soil is very nutrient rich. Some tropics have been replanted with tree plantations, which don't always grow well because the nutrient level in the soil, of course, is very low. We must harvest trees really no faster than they are replanted. A little thing here which does happen too is we tend to get disease. A big problem in Wisconsin right now, southern Wisconsin, is we're getting the ash borer, this guy right here, which is actually coming up and devastating our trees. It's coming up from southern Illinois. There's a huge ban right now on moving trees, wood that's cut from one region to another, because we don't want to transport that ash borer. There's other regions that have types of scabs and things. Think about Elm Grove. If Elm Grove got devastated by Dutch elm disease, of course, that's going to wipe trees. The U.S. Forest Service, and management in the United States, of course, forests do cover about 30% of our land, and about 80% of our wildlife species lives in there. So it's a lot of biodiversity. 40% of the United States forests are federally protected. The U.S. is mainly losing old growth forests. They're going in, they're very easy to cut down because there's not a lot of underbrush to get in the way. And we're losing a lot of second growth too, generally replaced with tree plantations. So what they'll do is cut down this natural biodiversity and then plant what they... Fires. Fires are a very natural part of our ecosystem. They're a type of secondary succession. Of course, they oftentimes are used to stimulate growth of new seedlings. Surface fires are literally that. They're on the surface of the ground. Oftentimes they burn underbrush. They don't really disturb the trees. The big trees, you can see there's maybe some scarring going on or charring, but that's about it. Generally, trees can survive that. They get rid of a lot of leaf litter. Most animals generally survive because it's a very slow-moving fire, and of course it does generate some plants and can get some bad stuff. Crown fires are the ones you see on the news all the time that are terrible. They hop and leap, or they're very hot rather than they leap from tree to tree. These pine trees tend to be very dry in the first place. You know that you have to keep a Christmas tree very much watered, otherwise if it's dry it can actually, if there's a spark or something, catch on fire really easily. So you can see how it's jumping from treetop to treetop here. We oftentimes still get ground litter in these areas, which can resurface and restart up later. This tends to be much greater destruction and cause much greater soil erosion in the long run because it basically wipes out the entire tree. So a ground fire actually is very unique, and what happens, it oftentimes occurs in peat bogs. Peat bogs are decaying matter. They're kind of swampy type areas. What happens is the nutrient, it's not quite soil yet, it's being broken down, so it's a lot of sticks and branches and things of that nature that are still in decomposition. Well, what happens is, let's see, we have a bunch of trees right here, and that clearly looks like a tree, and we have some underbrush here. The fire will get into these peat bogs and literally go underground and then resurface in another area. So you never know exactly where they are. They stay kind of lit underneath there as long as there's some oxygen that can penetrate. We do have some of this occur in this area. Not a lot. It's not real devastating to us, but it's one of those things where if it re-sparks in real dry areas, it can actually ground fires or crown fires. We do things like prescribed fires. We do that in Wisconsin. Prescribed, you purposely do it. Logging, oftentimes, if you go to an area, it'll leave a lot of debris behind. What happens is that debris is very prone to starting fires. So, hey, let's just, in a controlled sense, burn it. This would be like us going out to our environmental pond and purposely burning it very slowly, very controlled, standing there with water and not preventing it from getting out of control. Some areas use goats to clear that underbrush too, which is a win-win. It feeds the goats, and then, of course, you can get milk from the goats or cheese from the goats. In 2003, Congress did pass a law that allows timber industries to cut down trees in exchange for clearing the underbrush, because what they found is that will actually reduce the number of forest fires. So the goal then is reduce those ground level fuel that'll stimulate forest fires, clears flammable vegetation around homes, and of course creates fire lanes. Fire lanes are areas kind of like you see in the picture there, where if we, and they're cut oftentimes out west around here too, where if we have a forest fire over here start, we have a huge lane that hopefully it won't jump over there. Plus we can get firemen in here, firewomen, and fire. Controversy, of course, in national parks. Timber companies, of course, want low prices. Conservations want less cutting. We need resources, but how much do we give? Incentives have been given to the Forest Service for selling timber, of course. Reforesting does not include road building either, or overhead costs. A lot of times recreation, hunting, fishing adds more money than cutting timber. So if we just left everything and we had hunter or fishermen go in, or women, or camping, for example, that actually can create more revenue in protected areas than actually lumber. Why not increase efficiency of wood consumption? So we need to get a little bit smarter. Maybe not force the issue of cutting down or needing to cut down a lot of these resources. Build a little bit more efficiency. Construction, maybe have excessive packaging or junk mail. Think about if you're applying to colleges, all that junk mail you get. Do you really need to get that? And what happens is when you get all that, at one point you got to cut down the tree to get that paper to make it. So maybe reuse things like wooden shipping containers. There's a tree, you can see the picture on the right, called Kenoff. It's a big experimental phases yet. It needs fewer herbicides and pesticides. It's actually a nitrogen fixer, kind of like we talked about legumes were or are. It production uses low amounts of energy, less toxic wastewater. It actually grows really quick. So maybe we can use something like this to make paper instead of wasting all our trees. Use less paper in the first place. So let's talk tropical deforestation. Most tropical deforestation has occurred since 1950. Keep in mind, Brazil has most of the remaining rainforest. Problem is, at the rate it's going, it could be gone in 50 years. They've actually got, if you think about your house lot and then double it, so basically your living space, your yard, and then double it, there's actually up to 450 different tree species within a tropical rainforest in that small amount of land. That is amazing diversity. We could lose chemicals. We could lose a huge storehouse. We get awesome plants from tropical rainforest, things like the Revolvia, which grows in the Southeast Asia. It can be used as a tranquilizer. It can be used to treat high blood pressure. So if we get rid of it, we're going to lose possible medicines. Foxglove, which is a type of digitalis, grows in Europe. It's can be used for heart failure. So if we get rid of that medicine, people could oftentimes suffer. In the Pacific region, we get something called the yew tree, which actually is a potential treatment for ovarian cancer. If we could lose that. Cinchona is in South America. It actually can be used as a malaria treatment. I know a lot of tribesmen down there actually. Rosy periwinkle grows in Madagascar, very endemic, only in that area. It can be used possibly to fight Hodgkin's disease or lymphocytic leukemia. Neem tree, another one which is grown oftentimes in India. It actually is a very versatile tree. It grows really quickly. It doesn't require a lot of herbicides, and it actually can be used to treat a lot of diseases. It can actually be used as a natural insecticide and actually can be used as a sperm. So reasons for tropical deforestation, why are they doing it? Well, population growth and poverty really drive subsistence farmers to attempt to farm, although the nutrient level is really poor. Oftentimes governments pay people to cut it down. What they're doing oftentimes is they're using that, they're burning the wood, and then they use the charcoal that's left over and sell it to other nations that need that to create or use the fuel for heat or for cooking. Poor given title to land they clear. So if you clear that, you make some money off it, you can live on it. International companies do encourage building and mining, unfortunately. Ranchers move in after slashing and burning and try to bring their animals in. Healthy rainforests do not burn, though. So what happens is they have to cut it down and let it dry for a really long time. But logging, settlements, grazing, farming do dry them out, unfortunately. To reduce deforestation in rainforests, we need to help settlers learn sustainability. Obviously, if you're going to cut a little bit down, why not plant a little bit more? We do, of course, use the debt for nature swaps. We are forgiving some of Brazil's debt to us if they keep their rainforest, because the United States recognizes how good of a resource it is. Maybe have loggers harvest better. We talked about the techniques before. Reforest it and prevent illegal logging. Now what's happening in Kenya is, because of this green belt movement and planting all these seedlings, is they're actually planting those and promoting ecotourism in Kenya and making a lot of money. They've learned that instead of cutting down their forests, they make a lot more money by having tourists like us. The neem tree, of course, of India, as I mentioned before, broadleaf evergreen, can reforest very quickly, native to India and Burma. Of course, it needs a little bit more tropical of a region to grow. Florida would be an example. It's deemed the village pharmacy because it is a natural alternative to pesticides. It can act as a spermicide. The problem is, if we do bring it to Florida and grow this massively, it could become invasive and take over natural species. All right, that's it for Chapter 11, Part 2. One more to go.